Very good. Thank you. I appreciate that. And let me get to my gallery view so I can see everybody on this morning and welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, welcome everyone to this public meeting of the Board of Governors. I think Randy already did, but I'll just say it again, asking everybody on Zoom to please leave your lines on mute unless you want to speak, and that will help minimize background noise. And if you're on the phone, once again, you'll have to push *6 the first time to speak to unmute your line. So Sharissa, would you please do the roll call of the board?
Sharissa, you might be muted.
Yeah, you might still be muted, Sharissa.
Her line may not be connecting properly, so I'll do it real quick, Madam Chair.
Randy, I appreciate it.
Representative Briggs.
Here.
Governor Bronson. Governor Dunlop.
Here.
Governor FIFO.
Here.
Governor Hauser.
Here.
Senator Martin. Or Designee Trago.
Here.
Governor Mazur.
Here.
Governor Moskowitz. Governor Mueller.
Here.
Secretary Rivera. Deputy Secretary Ortega.
Here.
Representative Roy.
Here.
Senator Schwenk. I saw you, Senator. Chair Shapiro, we have you. Governor Smith. Secretary Sneed.
Here.
Governor Weaver.
Here.
Governor Yeomans.
Here.
And Faculty Liaison, Dr. Phillips.
Here.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Randy. Let me just start by quickly saying I really want to thank the Pennsylvania House of Representatives for overwhelmingly passing House Bill 2171. We so appreciate all the hard work that went into that from the point of view of those who sponsored it and led it, and of course our own incredible team of Cody Jones and Dan and everybody who worked so hard on it. It's a real milestone, and I really appreciate it. And before we begin with our business today, I feel compelled to speak about where we are at this minute as Americans, and more particularly as governors of Pennsylvania's state system of higher education. We're truly at an inflection point that is either a perfect storm or a perfect opportunity to fully embrace our mission in a way that is direct and honest and compelling. Today, we're discussing system preparation for university operations in the fall of 2020 because of the circumstances we find ourselves in due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we are also swept into a national discourse and a call for action to finally and truly address racism and injustice sparked by the video of George Floyd's murder. These monumental inflection points are not unrelated. The injustice of George Floyd is mirrored in the injustice of COVID-19 impacting the African-American community very disproportionately in terms of both health outcomes and unemployment ramifications. I can't merely give lip service by denouncing the incident and expressing grief and sympathy for Floyd and his family, so many other Black people who have met a similar fate, and the African-American community at large, even though I feel all of that, and I know all of us do. But if we don't take action transparently and specifically, then our feelings and our words are worthless. And if we don't act, then in spite of all of our efforts on this and everything else we do as a system, we will never deliver our mission to the people of Pennsylvania. Because our mission, as the only set of universities owned by the Commonwealth, is to offer quality and accessible education to prepare students for professional and personal success in their lives, and to be able to contribute to the economic, social, and cultural development of Pennsylvania's communities. And therefore, our vision has to be that PASHA universities offer full accessibility and equity to all, period. We are not perfect. I need to say this. In my 4 years on the Board of Governors and as chair, I've been on our campuses and I've had dialogues and meetings with students, faculty, staff, and others about bias and injustice that they've experienced. I've read our surveys and I've been told about racist social media postings. So my thoughts are based on all of this information. And what leads me to is the realization that as we engage more deeply in system redesign, we need to more clearly state that redesign emphasizes the goal of eliminating barriers to full equity and eliminating, yes, any vestiges of bias or racism that may still exist. And it also means to dip strongly into the large pool of love and goodwill and set of common values as Americans that we all share. That's the positive side. So I propose to this board that we consciously add this critical component to this next stage of system redesign. It's always been part of redesign, but I'm saying, let's move in front and center, let's name it, and let's talk about it often as we go through, and let's have action plans that relate directly to it. This is a natural link to our mission in any case. Actually, to me, it's a sine qua non of achieving our mission. So here's the good news. Our universities already are working hard on this. There are a number of excellent and effective initiatives already underway to address the issues of bias in the achievement of equity. But system redesign now can be the vehicle that channels the expertise of our universities, that really draws the ideas of everybody in our system, that convenes and delineates the best initiatives and what's going on to scale them across the Commonwealth in a set, strong, and firm and named agenda of equity and the elimination of racism. In my faith and tradition, we are taught that you are not obligated to complete the work, but nor are you free to desist from it. So be it for us, and thank you very much. And I'm now going to turn to Dan for his opening remarks.
Madam Chair, Cindy, I'm not going to follow that with any words. You have my complete allegiance to that mission. You have that of our presidents, and our actions. We will be judged by our actions, and we will act. And I look forward to continuing this conversation more extensively in the fall at our next meeting. And thank you for those words.
Thank you, Chancellor. I really appreciate that. And now we're going to proceed with today's agenda. So first, let me ask if there's any member of the general public that wishes to speak before the board. You were asked to dial into the number provided online and in the sunshine notice. Let me now turn to Randy to ask if we have anybody who wants to speak publicly.
There is nobody on the public line for that.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me now ask if any of our statewide union leaders would like to offer remarks.
We do have remarks from Dr. Jamie Martin, the new president of APSCUF. Dr. Martin.
Congratulations, Dr. Martin.
Thank you, although I keep saying I'm not sure if it's congratulations or condolences at this point.
Right.
Okay, so Chairwoman Shapira, Chancellor Greenstein, governors, university presidents, and guests. Good morning. As just stated, my name is Jamie Martin. I'm the president of the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties. We represent the faculty and coaches at our 14 great universities. And as you know, I'm following in the footsteps of our incredible past president, Dr. Ken Mash. On behalf of our membership, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all of you for the time and energy that you put forth in trying to improve the lives of our students and for striving to fulfill the mission of our system, to provide a high quality, affordable education for them. As Chairwoman Shapiro just eloquently stated, I think it goes without saying that we're amid unprecedented times as a nation and as a state system. There is great uncertainty as we grapple with a deadly virus that has taken the lives of over 110,000 of our fellow citizens, has shuttered businesses and schools, and decimated our economy. There is great social unrest that can be seen in the protests across our country as millions appropriately demand social justice. And there is uncertainty at our universities as we begin to plan for fall 2020. There are questions about the structure of our classes, the protocols and policies that are needed to keep everyone healthy and safe, concerns about being able to accomplish social distancing in a variety of settings, and the accommodations that will be necessary for individuals who are or who reside with someone who is vulnerable to this virus. And I expect that some of these topics will be discussed here today. While uncertainty exists, I know that certainty is present in the resolve among my colleagues to provide the best educational experiences that we can for our students. The way in which faculty members quickly pivoted from face-to-face classes to remote delivery in March was remarkable and demonstrates the talent, dedication, and skills of my colleagues. They now stand at the ready to work in partnership with the administration at their respective universities to tackle the questions about a safe return to the fall semester. Please continue to involve them, to listen to the wisdom that they have gained from years in the classrooms with students, and to recognize the love that they have for their schools. We all want to be back in the classrooms interacting with our students, but we recognize that the fall 2020 semester is but one semester and many others that will follow. I ask that we have a thoughtful discussion about returning to campus in a safe manner and one that looks at the long term and not just the near. I do believe that those working so hard on vaccines and treatments for COVID-19 will be successful and our lives will return to some sort of new normal, but that day is not yet here. As Winston Churchill said, this is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but perhaps it is the end of the beginning. Our hope is that at the end, that all of our students, our staff, and all of our faculty return in good health. Our campuses will have the energy and vibrance that they had in early March, that we see our students relaxing and playing on our quads, and that we will be face-to-face in our classrooms with no need to wear masks. I do hope that all of you and all of your families are safe and well, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. We appreciate those remarks. And again, welcome and congratulations. Our only item of business today is to hear about the state system universities' plans for the fall semester and about our framework as a board for helping them make those plans. So before I turn it over to Dan, I just want to say a special word of thanks to everyone who worked so hard to help our students finish the spring semester successfully. Dr. Martin, you were very eloquent about it, and we certainly agree with everything you said. To our faculty, staff, administrators, trustees, to the chancellor, his staff, please know that my fellow board members and I so appreciate the sacrifices you have made, the 24/7 days that you've been putting in over the past 3 months to ensure that we continue to teach, continue to educate, and stay on mission. You're all remarkable people, and I'm honored to serve with all of you. And with that, let me turn it over to Dan again to walk us through our discussion today on fall operations.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks so much. Echo your thanks as well, Cindy, to faculty, staff across the system. That was quite a heroic effort, doing in a matter of days, moving an operation which was entirely or largely face-to-face to one which was entirely remote in a matter of days, if not shorter in some circumstances. So that was really quite an incredible lift and successfully done. So thank you. We moved very quickly from pandemic response to planning for the summer and the fall. I want to shout out to our presidents who began that planning process early with their teams, working in different ways with their local stakeholders. We were learning together, learning from each other, learning from them. We were working closely with the Pennsylvania Department of Education as it was developing guidelines, pouring what we were learning into those guidelines, learning from the guidelines development in ways that helped our presidents and their teams. I think plan for the fall was a very good process. I want to thank Noe Ortega, our board member in particular, for taking such great care in consulting, not just with me, with us, but with the higher education leadership across the state in developing the guidelines that we're all going to be working within. So it's an ongoing process. There's still work to do, but I am pleased with the progress that's been made under very difficult circumstances, dealing with enormous number of unknowns, but moving forward expeditiously. Randy, I can't see the slides. I can now, so that would be great. So let me begin with the overview of the systems approach that we're going to be presenting and recommending to the board today, and then I'll go into some detail about how it's constructed and what you should expect in the fall. So our approach suggests that university presidents, in consultation with their stakeholders, will determine how to engage in face-to-face instruction on their campuses. They're developing their plans. Many are have already been released in some form. Others are coming shortly behind. They're building those plans, obviously, with input from their local stakeholders, working with each other, I've said, with our office and with the Pennsylvania Department of Education. It's very important that we do that because our universities are very different, and the plans that are being developed will reflect very different local circumstances. They serve different communities. They exist in different regions. Those regions are being impacted differently by the pandemic. They have different facilities and structures, so that the options that they have in thinking through how to mitigate risk while encouraging and supporting our students' continued success are all very different. And so, and thanks again to the Pennsylvania Department of Education for releasing guidelines that allow us that degree of latitude, room for maneuver. Plans will be consistent. So while they're varied, though, they will be consistent. They will all focus on supporting our students' continued progress towards their degrees while mitigating health and safety risks. They will all include contingency plans, moving to alternative modes of operation should the pandemic resurge, whether in their counties or on their campuses. And they'll obviously comply with state system bargaining agreements, academic and operational policies, et cetera. As he said, they will conform to the Pennsylvania Department of Education guidelines. I'm pleased to announce I'm gonna not spare Noe's blushes. I know he's on the, I saw his face in the tiles. We've had inquiries from other states about whether they can borrow those guidelines, so well done. The guidelines identify what kinds of face-to-face instruction can happen in different county phases, red, yellow, and green. And they decouple in this regard the activity, what sort of face-to-face instruction can occur in the counties in those phases from student being able to be housed resident on campus. And this is important. One of the things we learned as the pandemic ensued and the state was under stay-at-home order, was that many of our students had nowhere to go and had to reside on campus. And so it was important, I think, as we go forward to understand that and to ensure that we think separately about what face-to-face instruction can occur in different phases and separate that from what kind of residential activity can happen. It's important to point out that in the guidelines, face-to-face instruction can be permitted. And again, it's at discretion of the local institutional leadership in red, yellow, and green phases. Think about it as the number of students that can be brought back for face-to-face instruction grows in each of those phases. Restricted, highly restricted in red, less so in yellow, and not so in green. So we can move on to the next slide, Randy. The guidelines require 5 things of a university, that the university obviously coordinate with its local health officials or equivalent, that they develop a strategy to safely resume in-person instruction, monitor health conditions on their campuses, mitigate and contain the virus should outbreaks ensue, and obviously communicate with their stakeholders locally. Plans should be posted on the website so that folks know exactly what to expect. Student, faculty, staff, and the local community know exactly what to expect of the university. You want to go forward to the next slide, Randy? Obviously, there's some additional encouragement from the Pennsylvania Department of Education in a handful of critical areas, suggesting that the universities look in a variety of areas in order to adjust their operational procedures in order to ensure social distancing amongst those who are on campus and to mitigate the risk of infection spread. Let me go on to the next slide. And the guidelines usefully compile a set of recommended practices in critical areas. These aren't mandated practices, but they're a compilation of work from the CDC and from numerous other sources, and are suggestive of activities that universities ought to consider as they plan for their how they're going to resume face-to-face instruction in the fall. All right, so you just go to the next slide. So we've spent a lot of time working with our presidents and their leadership teams, understanding the kind of scenarios that they're pulling together as they think about how to reopen in fall. A group at my office interviewed all of the teams at the universities over the last several weeks and got some understanding of the kinds of scenarios they were planning. And it was helpful to, as we were developing the Pennsylvania, working with the Pennsylvania Department of Education, developing their guidelines, to identify areas that maybe the guidelines didn't go into, that we would need some additional layer of support for our universities. And we identified maybe a handful that are listed on this slide. So think of the Pennsylvania Department's guidelines as being the sort of broader framework, and then it's added to with a small number of guidelines that we'll develop at the system level, or at least that we're considering at the system level, that can provide additional supports for our universities. Things having to do with institutionally sponsored travel, things having to do with our expectations with respect to students, faculty, and staff, and with their expectations of our universities. Processes for addressing requests from employees for flexible work arrangements, things that are very unique to our operations as a system, and where it may be important for us to be as consistent as possible. So together with the Pennsylvania Department of Education, the framework that they've provided for re-engaging in face-to-face instruction, and a handful of additional system-wide guidances, our university's plans will begin to materialize. Some already have, as I've said. You'll see more over the next days and weeks. I want to give you a kind of overview based on the interviews that we've done with each of the planning teams. So this is at a high level. The plans, as I said, vary in very various ways, but there are a number of common themes and threads, and I want to pull them together just to give you a flavor. So in terms of the planning processes, most universities used a consultative process, including key constituencies, often breaking up into teams, looking at various different operational functions, instruction, facilities, residences, et cetera. Where plans are being developed and scenarios are beginning to be pulled together, they're being shared now more broadly with the broader community also in many places. So there is good consultation going on, as Jamie said, and we expect that to deepen and continue in the days and weeks ahead. Next slide, Randy. In terms of the academic model, there was a number of, this has been obviously all the rage in higher education journalism. Universities and colleges are designed to bring people together in close contact with one another. That's the way learning happens. That's the way, not just in the classroom, but also in the co-curricular activities. If you think about the design of our facilities, the design of our practices, it is about assembling people in close quarters and engaging in conversation and exchange of ideas, sports and activities, both in and outside the classroom. So in some respects, we're not designed to be managed through a period of pandemic. And so we've had to think across our universities about how to change pretty much every one of our operational practices, so that we could enable people to communicate, engage, but to stay apart with each other, to practice social distancing. And this has happened in different ways, and again, in ways that reflect very unique local circumstances. Some universities have done this by just inviting selected cohorts of students back to campus so that there'll be fewer students involved in face-to-face instruction. So if you thin the number of people who are actually on campus, you can enable social distancing. And these aren't either or choices. Obviously, some are combining these options. Many are providing students with flexible delivery options, students and faculty, so that some students can be involved in face-to-face instruction, while others will engage in that instruction synchronously in a remote way, or even asynchronously in a remote way. Others are modifying course schedules using flipped approaches so that students are traveling through the curriculum in different sized cohorts. Again, think about thinning the crowd, if I can say it that way. Many are looking at modifying their academic calendar, changing the calendar sort of to distribute students differently across the curriculum, across the calendar. And there's also, you'll see a tendency to think about starting the semester somewhat earlier so that we can conclude the semester somewhat earlier. That's less about thinning the crowd and more about, trying to navigate what might be anticipated as a resurgence of the pandemic more generally in the broader community. So you'll see that going on as well. So let's go to the next slide. Sort of the general approach to the academic model. In face-to-face instruction, again, you're looking at range of options, equipping classrooms to support face-to-face instruction and online instruction, so that a class might be convened in a way where some students are actually physically present, others are engaged remotely. Using PPE in classrooms, separating students and engaging in social distancing so that only so many seats are being occupied, using different sized rooms for classes than would typically support them. Some folks are moving their larger lecture halls exclusively into online. So again, a variety of options that are being developed, again, to keep people apart, to respect social distancing. Student life, activities, housing, dining. Here, the variation really reflects the different capacities of the facilities. Obviously, many student activities are moving into an online modality or being conducted where they can be conducted in small groups. Minimizing housing occupancy in a variety of means. Some are looking at ensuring that all students have access to singles. Some are looking at using suite apartments and treating cohorts of students within the suite apartments as the family unit, looking after one another's health. Dining options are being, considered, whether reconstructing the dining halls so that they can enable social distancing, or just managing grab-and-go options. And obviously, with respect to athletics, still waiting for guidelines which are coming from other sources. With respect to health and safety, obviously, every single institution is putting the basic nuts and bolts in place, requiring social distancing of its students, faculty, and staff, requiring that masks be worn, introducing barriers in selected areas, guiding traffic flow, PPE in places where people are in close contact, much as you see in supermarkets. Introducing cleaning protocols so that high-touch surfaces are routinely cleaned, et cetera. And obviously making arrangements to deal with COVID-19 positive tests when they occur to the individuals who are affected, ensuring that quarantine facilities are available where they're needed. And we are awaiting guidelines from the Pennsylvania Department to deal with resurgence. Obviously, we know what to do if a county goes from green to red, or green to yellow, less clear, and this is an evolving conversation closely with our universities and with the Pennsylvania Department about what happens when a county remains in green, but if there's a resurgence in the campus community, which would be suggestive of its going entirely to remote instruction. So that is yet to come. Next slide. Randy, did I lose you? Great.
There you go.
Was that it?
That's it.
Wow. Okay. So the board action that we're recommending is that the Board of Governors endorses this framework, which essentially devolves responsibility to the presidents working with their local stakeholders, conforming to guidelines or adhering to guidelines created by the Pennsylvania Department of Education and any existing guidelines from the Office of the Chancellor. I want that in developing plans that enable the return to face-to-face instruction so that students may continue their progress, but in a way that mitigates health and safety risks to the extent that is possible. Let me leave it there for any questions or comments. Obviously, our presidents are here to if they have any comments or questions or any questions for them. And obviously Noe is here from the Pennsylvania Department of Education for any questions about the PDE guidelines. And thank you.
Thanks, Dan. I will ask if there are any questions on the presentation before we go to the motion. Any questions or comments?
This is Jan Yeomans. I do have a question, and this regards, maybe it's a question for Andy, but also probably for Dan. What liability do you think that we might be running by adopting what we're being asked to adopt today? And what kinds of documents, records, what kind of things would we need to be able to demonstrate that we adhere to the guidelines and the recommendations at all times?
Andy, do you want to take the question about liability, and I can go to the general one about accountability?
Sure. Can you hear me, Dan?
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, Governor Yeomans and the rest of the board. The question of liability is actually an area that we have been discussing, and we discussed it with university administration a week or so ago. As a state actor within the Commonwealth, we do enjoy sovereign immunity. So the exceptions to sovereign immunity, I believe there's 10 enumerated. One of them to the treatment or provision of providing medical care. And by and large, we do have health centers, but the reopening structure is not an exception to sovereign immunity. So we will have sovereign immunity as it relates to tort actions in many cases, as Governor Yeomans, as you refer to the liabilities that we could incur with this. I think that we have discussed internally, we're really talking about reputation and the cost that reopening comes with. And I think that's more appropriate for the chancellor to speak to. But there are not liabilities in which the legal office is unduly alarmed. Obviously, we want to work with the chancellor and the team and this board in doing the best we can to follow all the guidance from the CDC, Department of Health, and the provisions that Governor Ortega helped put together from PDE. Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And just on the accountability issue, let me address that. This is something that there's a number of issues here. So first of all, the PDE guidelines require that the universities have 5 strategies in place and that they're made available on the web. And so there's a general accountability to the general public that the universities use their best efforts in order to continue or re-engage in face-to-face instruction in a way that mitigates health and safety risks to the extent possible. In some ways, that's the strongest form of accountability because, as Andy said, because of the reputation risks that are entailed in the decisions that are being made. And I think it's I think it's entirely appropriate when you think about our students who need us. Many of the students that we engage don't do desperately well in remote learning. They need the kind of engagement that our universities provide. And that is a chief consideration in pulling these plans together. The economic disruption that we're experiencing needs us to ensure that somehow we can continue to develop the kind of graduates that our economy needs to recover and grow. So, you know, I think that the approach that we're taking allows our universities to engage in ways that make the most sense given the communities that they serve, the communities that they're in, the facilities that they have, so I think so the accountability to the board, I suppose, is really through the adherence to the plans that do the universities have those 5 strategies that the Pennsylvania Department of Education requires, and they will, and we've been discussing ways to surface these strategies so that they are at least visible in a common format, and so that the information is more readily available. In terms of evaluating whether University A is using the right cleaning fluid in its contact with in its cleaning high touch surfaces, those are the kind of decisions that I think rightly the guidelines, the Pennsylvania Department of Education guidelines, and the board and the chancellor's office are devolving to the universities, working within frameworks and recommended best practices as assembled by the department. I don't know if Noe, you wanted to address this. It's a similar issue I know that you're facing across higher education in Pennsylvania generally.
Before,
Sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Noe. Before you go though, can I just, I'm just got to push on the left tail a little bit, and this is paranoia, but we better think about it before rather than getting stuck having to think about it after. So just suppose that, heaven forbid, we have some sort of an outbreak at one of the universities, and or the plaintiff's bar decides, oh, there's a class action suit here because there's a thing of university students getting sick and missing class and incurring debt and possibly even dying, things like that. And the families all get together and say, okay, we're going to sue this university. These people are going to pay for what they've done. What kind of protection do we have, do we need to have against that? And that's where I was getting to the records and the documents and things.
Got it.
If we're hauled into court or depositions or something like that, can we present that, look, here's our protocol, here's our record of compliance with our protocol. We believe that this is a best effort and we shouldn't be questioned on this.
Andy, do you want to take that?
Sure. I go back to the, obviously anyone can make claims at any time for anything, whether or not they have merit is a separate issue, Governor Yeoman. I think what the process that the chancellor is outlining is that the universities are being asked to follow all the guidance and the best practices that are being provided to them. And obviously within a modicum of discretion that they can exercise that considers their individual circumstance, their location, the color of their county. If you are looking for a blanket insulation against that, if there's any outbreak, I don't think that anyone can make that representation. I think the issue, though, if you're looking at it in the lens of liability and risk mitigation, this is not something that is of it almost sounds inhumane, but from a legal standpoint, the risk is not probably as great as the fear or what this would look like, what it may do to a university. That's a different question of whether there are people and individuals held accountable for deviations from standards, as well as, trying to understand and control for things that are going to be extremely hard to control for if there's another outbreak of a pandemic. So I'm not trying to dodge the question. The university presidents and their staffs, we did a workshop, an education piece with my office a week or so ago related to what liabilities are in the legal landscape in Pennsylvania as a state agency within the Commonwealth and the protections that are afforded a Commonwealth agency. So if there's an outbreak, could there be lawsuits? There always could. Should they be dismissed on the grounds that I've articulated? They should be. But short of that, I don't think there's a level of a guarantee that any of us can provide about, first and foremost, what the legal analysis would be aside from the law is clear, and this is how my office has advised the university.
Thank you very much.
No, did you want to make a comment just with respect of expectations of the department and the way you're seeing it across the state with other sectors?
Sure. And I think, when you think about the accountability, there's just so much uncertainty with regards to the number of things that can emerge, right? Like what we're seeing now among a number of institutions is that, folks are raising claims around whether or not the efficacy of instruction that was provided during the pivot was even aligned with the commitment the institutions had made to them when they begun the semester. And, there are things that are all over the place that I think are beyond the control. I think focusing, a lot of what we wanted to do is to make sure that we empowered the institutions to be able to call on elements of the post-secondary institution that have been set up to assist with this, right? And more specifically, I think there's going to be an increased reliance on what can be done by academics, for example. Many of the things that are important here are being able to encourage young folks who are attending institutions to resume some sort of self-accountability in how they voluntarily report information, for example, for monitoring purposes. If you've been exposed, there's an obligation that you have sort of to the others around campus. And I think that's going to have to, there's going to have to be a large emphasis those public good outcomes that happen in the classroom, and then student services. The idea that many of the leadership practices that happen on institutions is peer-to-peer changing of behavior to minimize the accountability. I don't want to put the entire responsibility on the leadership of the campus per se. I think there's a number of students who should step into that space and try to do that. And I think all of this is just to see how much you can mitigate risk, and then the rest is going to be it's going to be mired by uncertainty that exists all the time. So I just kind of want to put that out there. There's no real easy answer to this, and I think as I engage with Dan and a few other institutional leaders, those concerns were raised periodically, and stepping into this decision, I think, is something that's weighing very heavily on a number of leaders because of the circumstances that could arise because your institutions are interacting with communities all the time. But anyhow, just emphasize on what Dan has been sharing.
Thank you, Noe. I know Senator Schwenk has a question. Let me just say briefly that obviously it's still uncharted territory, and we are making an extremely good faith and very as educated as possible effort on this. There was a discussion as to whether or not there should even be a board resolution with regard to this. I felt very strongly that the board also needs to demonstrate accountability. And that's why we're looking at this motion today altogether. But as has been stated, we're doing our hardest work. We're all working together on it at every level. We're bringing in as much expertise as possible. And yet there's still risk, and that's just the nature of what it is. Senator Schwenk, you had a question?
I do. Thank you, Cindy. First, a comment. I think this is really good planning. I commend everybody who had a role in helping to make this happen. Personally, I can't think of anything that's more important to the future of Pennsylvania society is the reopening of our educational institutions. Everything from preschool to post-secondary education. This is going to kind of make or break us in terms of the future of this Commonwealth. Just my opinion there. But a couple questions, some of them probably maybe down in the weeds a bit, but one, in terms of the PPE and the cleaning, there's going to be extra costs associated with this. is that going to be covered by, I think it's the 53 million, Dan, that we received from the feds? Or how are we going to help the presidents accommodate that? It's because, you know, we don't know exactly what that will be, but surely there's a cost to it. So that's question one. And
Yeah, I'm going to turn to Sharon in a minute just to give a quick accounting of the various funds that we have received. Our expectation is that they will not cover all the costs that are going to be that are going to be entailed. You know, this is an interesting time. Our mission is to serve these students. Our mission is to serve these communities. Our mission, in light of what is happening nationally, is to address the challenges that Cindy set out with. Those are challenges where higher education has profoundly important role to play. And while cost is always a consideration, it can't be the driving consideration.
well, I'm not saying that it is,
I know,
Dan.
I know
I'm
you
just
aren't.
saying that it's something that, you know, we've got to be thinking about. Then the other issue is in terms of as we bring students back on campus and, you know, the likelihood that there might be spikes. We've seen this, right, in the news in other states that once they open more, there's spikes in the number of cases of COVID. Will we have the availability of testing on campus? Students aren't going to necessarily be able to get to, and I'm thinking of Kutztown, which is the, you know, the institution in my district. To get from Kutztown to Allentown or to Reading, you don't have a car, there's no way to get there. So have we had conversations with the Department of Health about mobile testing units if required as part of, you know, what we need to be thinking about? And then one last one, really down in the weeds, but I think it's an issue. We had a call about it in our office for students who have off-campus housing. They've got leases. If we find out that we've got to flip back totally to remote, how are we going to help assist those students? And maybe we can't, but I think it's something that we've got to be thinking about. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Senator Schwenk. So on testing, no, we don't have the resources. And this is not just about money. This is about the availability of testing.
Right,
I mean,
that's what I mean.
And the only possible avenue for us to have access to the testing and contact tracing that would allow us to integrate those surveillance techniques, those and other surveillance techniques into our plans would be direct engagement of the state. And that remains an open issue. We're relying generally on really a kind of a social compact approach where we have expectations of our universities for performing, you know, in the best efforts against their plans. And in turn, our universities have expectations of our faculty, staff, and students to behave in ways that keep each other safe. But the absence of the surveillance techniques is a considerable challenge, and it's something that we would urge, and we have continued to urge through the Pennsylvania Department of Education and the Pennsylvania Department of Health to consider seriously. This is naturally not just a state issue. This is a national issue.
Mhm.
And Senator Schwenk, just with regard to your last, you know, be in the weeds yet perfectly valid consideration. We have started through the Pesci Foundation an emergency fund that is specifically about, you know, helping students who are facing issues like that, actually specifically because of COVID, although we have a larger pilot that we want to launch to provide emergency money to students who have, you know, $1,000 or less on a bursar bill and therefore can't register for the next semester, you know, to help with retention and persistence. So thank you for the opening, because now I'm going to take the opportunity to ask everybody on the board to please step up if you can and contribute whatever you can to this COVID emergency fund to help students who find themselves in financial difficulties like this. It's you know, not an overall way to address the issue, but it's one way to address the issue should it arrive. So thank you for the opportunity for that pitch.
And Cindy, it would be remiss, not to ask the presidents if they wanted to weigh on this or any of the other issues. Really, the hard work and the creative thought, and really the
Yes.
agility has really arisen from them. And I feel like I'm acting as a front person. And if others wanted to chime in, please don't hesitate.
I might, a couple things if I might, Madam Chair. This is Mike Driscoll.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate the questions from the senator. These are things we've been dealing with as we pivoted in March to make things happen for our students and elsewhere. Just two comments. I think that all of us have been working as actively as we can with, for example, local landlords to try to find alternate solutions where we can. We've used some of the CARES Act funding that we've already received to help students in ways that may assist students that have been in some of those situations with housing and other bills. And we'll continue to do that. As Dan says, this is our job, and we have to figure that out. I would point out that the idea of testing as a protection against the disease is probably not what we'll see recommended anytime soon from the CDC. We're seeing recommendations for testing when symptoms are in place. And the key really is this social compact with people doing the right things and making sure that behaviors are correct. And then as soon as symptoms are showing, making sure that folks are connected. And each of the 14 of us are in conversation with our local health providers, agencies, and so on to try to ensure that we have access to all the care that we can. But as the chancellor said, it's very difficult to imagine where routine testing will be happening every day for every individual. Just the cost of that and the efficacy of that, based on what we're seeing now from the science, is probably not going to drive us fully in that direction. So that's just
I appreciate that answer, but I wasn't suggesting that, we just test everybody. But if there is an outbreak, or if there's a student that is ill, presents themselves to the health clinic on campus, what are our plans and the contact tracing? That's what I'm referring to. I get
very good. I appreciate that. And again, I would just say that each of us, and we've shared best ideas and practices, are speaking with our local health providers regularly to make sure that we can do that. We could use, I think, additional assistance, as all of our rural communities could, in making sure that's available for all of our citizens, including our students in some of the areas in which we reside and work. So that's certainly still out there and a concern. Absolutely. I appreciate the questions, and it reflects some of the detail discussion planning that we've been working on together as a team, as Dan has indicated. So thank you.
Thank you for doing it.
Mike, while you're speaking, or you or others, did you want to comment on expectations about whether existing? I mean, I don't want anyone to sound ungrateful for the considerable support that has been shown by federal and state governments, but expectations whether and to what extent known available support is likely to cover the costs of the various mitigation efforts that you and others will be undertaking into the next term.
I think it's fair to say that we don't have the full and complete accounting of all of the pieces of the costs we've already incurred, and that's something we're actively working on. I'm also aware, in addition to the CARES Act funding, and thanks again to the legislature for the allocation recently of that to us, but also I understand that we can access some PEMA funding as well in certain categories. A big expense that's coming for all of us, I believe, is adjustments to facilities, whether that's additional online capability or just simple things like barriers in offices and classrooms. To give a detailed example, again, a little in the weeds maybe, but we don't have full costing for that. And I expect that as we start to get into the depths of that, we'll quickly exhaust the aid that's been provided already and have to go beyond that.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks.
Thank you. I didn't realize I was muted. Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate that. And let me just remind board members that, or if you want to ask a question or make a comment, or others who are participating in the call, in the participants feature at the bottom of the Zoom screen. If you go into it, you'll find a raise hand feature that you can use. Representative Roy, I know that you wanted to ask a question or have a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. As far as the liability issue, just for people who may not have heard about this, last evening, the Senate and the House, we passed a resolution to repeal the state of emergency. So if the state of emergency is no longer in place, that would significantly reduce liability if anybody's concerned about us being open during a state of emergency. Now, lawyers might, do battle, but as far as we're concerned in the House, it is a done deal. It has to be published in the Pennsylvania Bulletin, but the state of emergency is over. As far as testing, I don't mean this to sound negative, but 2/3 of the deaths in Pennsylvania for COVID-19 have occurred in nursing homes. A couple of days ago, the Secretary of Health announced that the goal of the Pennsylvania Department of Health is to test all nursing home residents within the next 30 days. So, I'm not a lawyer, but if 2/3 of the deaths are at nursing homes, and why it would take 30 days to test everybody when that's where most of the deaths are, if PASSI does not do testing, I think it'd be pretty reasonable, to say, well, if nursing homes where 2/3 of the deaths are, if they're going to take another 30 days to test people, it's pretty reasonable that when most of the PASSI students are a much younger age group in good health, that they're not able to test. I mean, there's just not enough test kits. So I don't think testing is a big concern. Now, the biggest expense the PASSI system has, in my opinion, is if we don't go back to having a nearly normal, well-rounded, in-person, interactive education, we're going to lose a lot of students. Students want real college. They don't want college through a computer screen. They don't mind taking a few online classes here or there, but they want that interaction. They want all those informal learning opportunities, networking opportunities, working on the newspaper staff, playing intramural sports, just doing the different things that you do in college. So I really hope that the presidents get our universities back to as close to normal as possible this fall. And I really hope that the students see that's going to happen and they want to return this fall. Thank you.
Cindy, you're muted.
Sorry, I did the opposite of what I thought I was doing. I think Meg, Secretary Sneed, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, just to address Representative Roy's comments about the disaster declaration, we do not believe that the legislature has the ability to end the disaster declaration, and that authority lies squarely with the governor. So I'm sure this will be litigated, but when the concurrent resolution is presented to the governor, he will disapprove it. So we will proceed. We proceed as though the disaster declaration remains in effect.
Okay, let me just, I'm just gonna say that Senator Martin, I'm gonna call on you next. I think you were next. I'm hoping that we can kind of stay on point. We know that there are disagreements and that there are politics involved. I'm going to acknowledge that, but I'd like to keep it not at this board meeting and keep it to our business if possible. So I appreciate that. Thank you. And Senator Martin, you wanted to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everybody. No, I agree that that discussion probably isn't appropriate for this discussion right now. That'll be ironed out elsewhere. But I will say one thing that I would put on the radar of every one of the campuses, wherever you're at, is you're aware whether there were direct county allocations from Federal CARES Act funding, whether you are going to be, your county that you're located is receiving monies that were pushed out from the state for counties under 500,000. Most of those counties have put plans in place to whether it help businesses, so much going maybe to provide various cleaning and disinfecting services to institutions, testing and getting supplies. These are all things. And I'll just use my county as an example, where Millersville is located. You know, you have that $95.2 million, and they've created a plan and divvied up basically a budget as to how much is going to go to each thing. And I'd highly encourage, if you haven't met with your county commissioners, wherever your county is located, to find how they can assist you in the cost potentially, whether it is access to testing or PPE, which was another big expense coming out of that. I highly make yourself part of that discussion, because I can tell you that everyone else is in terms of who has these kind of concerns as they look to how to reopen with the new guidance. I think it would be beneficial if everyone tries to open up those lines of communication with those county centers, since they all 67 of them have a plan to implement to try to open up. And many of them already have the resources to do it that are there available for the community. So I just wanted to put that as part of the discussion.
Thanks, Senator Martin. I know that our presidents are all working quite closely with their local authorities. I don't know if anybody wanted to chime in, any of the presidents wanted to chime in on that, but thank you for that comment. And then Cindy, is it inappropriate? May I ask? I think Jamie Martin might want to just to chime in, if that's okay.
Jamie and then Noe is who I have. So go ahead, Jamie.
Thank you. I guess the only comment I wanted to make was in response to Representative Roy. We do understand that the students are not going to be in a high-risk group, at least of what we know of the virus at this point. But we are going to have faculty and staff that could very well be in a high-risk group. And I think we have to be cognizant of that and have some plan in place for those individuals as well. Because we're going to be in close contact with the students who, while they may not be in high-risk groups, we have a number of faculty, a large number of faculty who may well fall into that population.
Okay. Thank you. And I think Noe?
Sure. And Madam Chair, I similar to what was just raised, I just want to make sure this is a public meeting, that we exercise some caution into the narrative about our expertise around COVID-19. I think there are public health experts who should weigh in on certain elements. I think one of the challenges that all leaders face at the moment is trying to make sense of the information that's out there. And I think there's still so much uncertainty around there. I don't want to create the perception that people can feel some sense of safety without us really knowing the full details of that. And I think there are folks whose job it is exclusively to pay attention to that. So it was just want to caution us, because there's a number of folks tuning in and also processing the information that we're sharing. So I think we should exercise some caution.
You're on mute, Cindy.
I just gave the greatest speech of my life. I'm noting that we are past the time, 5 minutes past already, and I think I'd like to respectfully discontinue discussion and put forth this motion, which reads as follows: that the Board of Governors hereby endorses the development of the state system's 2020 fall framework and affirms its use by all 14 institutions within the state system. The board further affirms the chancellor's authority to modify the framework as needed to enable the state system and its sister institutions to nimbly respond to evolving circumstances in a timely manner. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Are there any questions that simply have to be asked before I put this to a vote? Okay. Thank you. Then let me ask, well, let's first do try for a voice vote. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
All right. Thank you. Are there any opposed? Okay, I believe the motion has carried. Thank you very much. Is there any other business to come before the board this morning? Okay, hearing none. The meeting is now adjourned, and thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you all in some way, shape, or form in July for our board meeting. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.